Good morning. Hope you're after a great day so far. We have a bunch of really big stories to cover for you today. And I was thinking about that expression this morning, there are two sides to every story, because there are at least two sides to every story, if not more. And my job as a journalist is to sample a little bit of all sides so that we can get a clearer picture of the story that's in front of us. I like to think about it like a kaleidoscope. You know, you turn the kaleidoscope, you get one image, you turn it again, you get another image, and eventually the image that's in the kaleidoscope becomes more clear. And that's what we're aiming for. We want to provide more clarity in a world that can seem really chaotic. So today I'm going to sample a little bit of different sides to these stories that some of you are familiar with, and it might feel a little uncomfortable. But the reason why I'm doing that is it's important for us to be aware of what the other side or other sides think. And that's what I want to do today. I'm not ready to turn the page on this developing story out of Texas about this hostage-taking situation in the Fort Worth area at a Texas synagogue. Just a reminder, Friday and Saturday are typically holy days in the Jewish faith. So the fact that this incident happened on a Saturday when you could expect people to be in a synagogue matters. It wasn't on a random Tuesday, for example. We know that a British man traveled over here and spent about 2 weeks in America before he did this. And we're still wondering why. What was his motivation? Why did he choose this location? Why did he choose now? And so we're waiting for more information on this story. In the meantime, I'm really paying close attention to word choice. President Biden called this an act of terror. The FBI says this is a terrorism-related investigation. But in general, those in authority are falling short of calling it a terrorist attack. And that's what we really have to pay close attention to. The reason why we want to pay close attention to this is because we just ended America's longest war. We've talked about the war on terror being 2 decades long, and we want to get an understanding of just how relevant these terrorist groups, whether it's Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or beyond, are to inspiring attacks. Because quite frankly, during this pandemic, we haven't seen a lot of them in the United States. So it's really important to get an understanding. Is this actually a terrorist attack? Now, why is that question even coming up? Apparently, according to reports, this individual, the hostage taker, referenced a woman who is in prison in Texas related to the war on terror. A little background on her. She's Pakistani. She was educated in part in the United States. She was investigated in Afghanistan for ties to Al-Qaeda. According to reports, she was radicalized after 9/11 and went down this path. So some point during the investigation, she's being questioned by U.S. military. And according to the story, she attacked and tried to shoot American soldiers. She was convicted in a federal court for attempted murder and for assaulting these soldiers, and terrorism was a part of this case. It led her to a sentence of more than 80 years. In the past, whether it's Al-Qaeda or ISIS, her name has come up as part of demands for different things, whether it's part of a demand to release an American hostage or part of a threat to kill Americans. There's been a repeated demand by different terrorist groups to get her out of prison. Now, others have demanded that as well, but it is a reoccurring theme for Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And so that's why we really have to pay closer attention if there's any ties between this individual and any of those groups. If there is, then this is a different story entirely. If there's not, then it's important to know that as well. So let's move back to what's going on in the U.S. Capitol today. You're going to hear a lot about, and you have heard a lot about, voting rights legislation. Let me just pause there before we get into any of this. Voting rights legislation, or that term voting rights, depends on who you ask. What we're talking about here is voting rights legislation that the Democrats are advocating for. And the Democrats use that term for these laws. The media uses that term. I'm going to use that term potentially very casually, but it's important what voting rights look like to one group look different to another group. So the voting rights law that Democrats are putting forward, Republicans are against. Now, are Republicans against voting rights in general? They would say no. They would say, we support voting rights, but we support laws in a different way. The backstory to all of this is that in a lot of Republican states, you're seeing some changes to election law or voting laws. Republicans are saying this is making elections at the state level more efficient and more secure, and quite frankly, more accessible. Democrats totally disagree with that. They say these laws are meant to actually limit access, and they want to pass these other laws that will prevent the states from moving forward. Another part to this backstory, In general, in America, states run their elections. So the federal government doesn't have a ton of federal voting laws that are determining how your state behaves. Why is that? Because we're the United States of America. So that's a really important part to this conversation as well about whether or not the voting rights laws as they stand in front of Congress right now, not only if they're appropriate for the times, but whether or not the federal government should have this power to dictate how states run their elections. So there's multiple layers to this debate. What you should know right now is that when we talk about voting rights legislation, you have two pieces of legislation coming before the Senate. But there's a big question about whether or not the Senate will ever vote on these laws. And the reason is that there's a procedural part of a law attempting to pass, and that is that there's debate. Debate happens, and you need a certain amount of votes to end debate and start the vote on the actual bill. Now, you only need a simple majority in most cases to pass the bill in the Senate. And the Senate Democrats have that because even though there's 50 Republicans and 50 Democrats or lawmakers that associate with both of these parties, you have the vice president who's a Democrat that's a tiebreaker. And so if the law could get to a final vote, the likelihood is it would pass with the vice president. That's how you could forecast it. But there's a question about whether or not it will get there because you have this procedural debate that has to take place and you need a greater than majority to end the debate. And right now you don't have that from lawmakers because you don't have Republicans and you don't have some Democrats that are saying we should end debate on this particular law. So what Democrats want to do is they want to end this procedural debate. They want to say, let's not even have this debate. Let's not even require this sort of vote to end debate. Let's just move to passing the bill. And that would be a change in the Senate rules, at least in the way that the Senate has typically operated. So it would be a really big deal. Some Democrats say, hey, we're not doing this because these are the moderate Democrats, like Kristen Sinema from Arizona, because it sets a bad precedent. If Republicans end up getting the majority in the Senate, then we don't have to have any debate at all anymore, and they can just pass things on a simple majority. And we don't want that. But other Democrats say, no, this is ridiculous. We've had so much partisanship. There's so much debate. We can't get anything through the Senate because we can't stop debate on basically anything. And this is it's antiquated. We have to stop this procedure. There's nothing that says that we have to do it. It's just something that we've done for decades. So here's what's going on in the Senate. And that's something to watch this week. Not only what happens to this voting rights legislation, but whether or not there's any sort of movement in the Senate that would change the procedure that is typically followed. I know that's a lot, but here's one place that lawmakers actually agree on that you're seeing some bipartisan support. You had a bipartisan group of senators go to Ukraine. They were there on Monday, and this is coming after a week of meetings between Russia, the United States, and European counterparts because there's all this concern that Russia is going to invade Ukraine at some point. Now, we also just heard today that the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is actually headed to Ukraine. This is not something that's expected, or at least wasn't announced. So this is also sort of ratcheting up this question of whether or not there's actually more concern after this weeks of meetings between Russia, Europe, and the United States, that the potential for a Russian invasion is going up. You're getting more reports of Russia withdrawing some of its diplomats from Ukraine. Microsoft came out and said that there's malware in Ukraine's government's networks. And obviously everyone's looking at Russia as being responsible for this sort of hacking. And so the bottom line is tensions are way up here. Two sides to this story are as follows, and we're going broad strokes here. Russia feels like NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, this is a huge defense alliance the United States is a part of, as well as most of Europe, is moving too aggressively eastward and putting pressure on Russia in a way that doesn't feel comfortable to them. They say that we're being aggressive. Meantime, America and NATO think that Russia's being aggressive by, going into Ukraine, annexing part of the country a couple years ago, moving into Belarus in ways that seems aggressive. And so both sides are looking at each other saying, you're being aggressive, and the other side saying, you're being aggressive. And this isn't a great place to be. So the question is, where do we go from here? We're watching this very closely. There's been this sort of arbitrary timeline that's been reported that somehow a Russian invasion would come over the next several weeks or not come at all. Who knows if that timeline's correct? We don't know what President Vladimir Putin is thinking about this. But this is an important part of the world that we need to watch because the stakes are very high. If Russia invades Ukraine, what will we do? what actually will we do? And that's one of the questions. How can we deter that from happening before it does? And if it does happen, what's the appropriate action by the United States and our allies? Ukraine isn't part of NATO, but NATO has been courting Ukraine. The United States has been courting Ukraine because why? Because it's right next to Russia and because it's an important strategic position. So a lot to watch there. We unpacked a lot. There's a lot going on today. I know that's a lot to kind of follow, but I hope this is helpful, sort of a conversation about some of these current events that give us a different way of perhaps looking at them than we would get if we just get 30 seconds here or there. So all of these stories and more are going to be up on our website. That gives you a little more time to read, look through some of our sources, so that you can also see where are we getting our information besides doing something old-fashioned, which is calling up a lot of people and doing some reporting. And that way you can get just another side of your story in a different way. All right, so more on smarternews.com. Questions and comments, let me know, and have a great day.